Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining 280 Group today for our next edition of our Product Management Leadership Series. Today, we are talking about creating team OKRs that inspire and drive value. My name is Roger Snyder. I'm the Vice President of Products and Services at 280 Group, and I'll be hosting this webinar today. And I'm very pleased to introduce Todd Blaquiere, Principal Consultant and Trainer at 280 Group. Thanks for joining us this morning, Todd.
Yeah, excited to be here.
And so I'm based in the Santa Cruz Mountains where the weather is actually quite nice. We had a heat wave that finally broke 2 days ago. So now we're not sweltering in triple digits. And it says Raleigh, North Carolina, that's where you live, right? But where are you today?
Well, I have been on a West Coast tour with my family, which is great when you work remote. You can work from anywhere. So I'm coming at you from my in-laws' basement in Brigham City, Utah.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks for being able to join us from Utah today. One of the key things that's important in the career of product management is to have a lot of resources available and to be able to talk with others in your profession in order to stay on top of what are the latest trends and be able to get questions answered. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend you join our LinkedIn group on product management leadership. We'll paste the link into the chat group for you there. And that's a great place for you to just kind of hear what's going on, share leadership practices, and be able to network with your peers. Couple of admin things I want to take care of before we dive into the meat of our presentation. During the webinar, we want to make this an interactive webinar. So I really would appreciate it if you throw your questions into the Q&A box. You'll see that we've highlighted that one. You can go into the Q&A box and I'll be monitoring those and ask folks to be able to even unmute and share their questions with us live so we can make this more of a conversation rather than just us presenting slides to you. We really want to be interactive. Now, one of the most frequently asked questions is, hey, how can I see this webinar later? And we are recording this webinar and all attendees will receive a link to the recording so that you can refer back to this webinar as often as you would like. Second question that we often get is, hey, can I get a copy of these slides? Unfortunately, we use copyrighted materials in these slides, so we don't share the slides themselves. But with that recording link, you will be able to go back and watch your favorite pieces over and over again if there's a resource that you find particularly helpful. So with that, let me just tell you a little bit about the 280 Group in case you're not familiar with us. We have been around for over 20 years, and our mission is to empower product professionals with the tools and techniques, the knowledge, the skills to build products that matter. And products that matter to your customers, products that matter to the success of your business, and products that matter to you as a product manager. So keep all of those things in mind. And we accomplish this mission by providing the most comprehensive set of resources, tools, free resources, training, consulting, in order to make individuals and teams more effective in their product management exercises and all of the things that they do in this exciting but challenging discipline of product management. So learn more at 280 Group. Again, we'll put a link in the chat for you to follow up and learn more. But now I want to kick us off right into a poll, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to you, Todd. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, Roger. So we're going to be talking about objectives and key results today. So I thought it'd be nice to start off just getting a baseline for where we're all at. So take a look at this poll question here. Click on the one that applies best to you. Do you create and track OKRs? Are you creating them, but you don't track progress? Maybe you use them in the past, but you don't use them anymore. And if you use OKRs, but you're not involved in them, if you're not involved in creating them, you need to learn how to. That'd be great to know. Maybe you have no experience with OKRs, so please let us know where you sit today.
Yeah, we'll leave this poll open for a couple more seconds because we're getting a good response rate. This is awesome. All right. Seems like we've settled on the number of people who are going to respond. Okay, great. So you can see the results, but I'll read out a couple of things here. So, all right, this audience needs help with OKRs. They have 39%, so they have no experience with OKRs. That's really good for us to know. That's great. And then 21% say, I create and track them regularly. That's awesome. So we've got some experts here as well, hopefully, and maybe we've got a couple of tips for them to up their game. I'm excited to that opportunity. And I've created OKRs, but don't track progress. Interesting. Well, we'll certainly talk about that one as well. Anything else that leaps to mind for you, Todd?
No, no, it's a great list. I think we have something for everyone.
Mhm.
Obviously, we'll go through some basics, but like you said, we have some advanced techniques and tips that hopefully apply to those that have been using them today.
Excellent. All
Great.
right.
So I'm going to kick off with a story. And of course, you expected, we're going to talk about product management and OKR. So of course, we're going to talk about Jim Carrey, obviously. Jim Carrey, if you're not familiar with Jim Carrey and his background, obviously you may know he's a comedian and actor, but he grew up poor. At times, even lived in a car. And when he was living in Los Angeles, trying to become a comedian, he was struggling. He was having a challenge getting any work. In fact, even some of his comedy gigs weren't going well. So he goes to go up to Elysian Park there in Los Angeles, and he visualized himself getting acting jobs. He would just sit up there and visualize his future. And then one day in 1985, Jim Carrey wrote himself a check for $10 million, which is rather audacious, $10 million. But he said, gave himself a $10 million check for acting services rendered. And he dated it for 10 years later, November 1995. So Jim Carrey was thinking, his thought when he shared this story was, if I can't do it by then I shouldn't be in this business. And so that was the mark he put for himself. I'm going to get a $10 million check. Well, just before Thanksgiving, 1995, and he had already had gigs, he'd already been working, his career had been going well, but he received a check for $10 million for Dumb and Dumber. So he ended up being paid, reaching that objective he set.
Wow.
And it's crazy, right? I mean, Roger, I've never done that. I haven't sat down and written myself a $10 million check yet.
No, me neither.
280 pays me well, just not quite $10 million yet.
Right. Yeah, me neither. Yeah. But wow, what an amazing story, right? That is pretty awesome. So he kind of set an objective, didn't he?
He did, and it's audacious, and I love that. That's what can be powerful about this, right? So objectives and key results, they answer two different questions. You see here, objectives, where do we need to go? What are we trying to get to? Key results, how do we know where they're getting there? And as we go through these details about how to create these, you can reflect back on the Jim Carrey story, and actually applies pretty well because he set an objective, $10 million. He knew he'd get there if he, for acting services rendered, if he made that much money.
Right.
So here's some tips on how we know we're creating a good objective. Here's some tips for how to do that. First off, we want to connect to the North Star. We want to connect to where we're headed. We want to create something that's ambitious and inspiring. I always say this, when I have a good leader, I put Roger, by the way, as someone who I admire, someone who could sit there and say, put a goal out there in the future that's exciting. I'll march up that hill. I'll march up a hill for someone that says, we're going to do something great. So you want something like that. You want something that's simple and memorable, almost something that can become a chant, something that you just know, it sticks with you. And one that comes to mind is think about this speech by Martin Luther King Jr. And I have the quote here because I would not remember this off top. I have the quote here. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is an inspiring objective.
Absolutely.
It's memorable. It's inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then one of the things when we're working on these, especially even at our company, right? One of the things when we're focusing the team on that North Star is to connect that to our overall company objectives, right? So if we want to, increase the number of learning methods available to our students because we're seeing the need with all of the changes over the last couple of years, that as a company objective then drives some of our product OKRs as well, right?
Absolutely, yes. And I was going to say on that, you want something that's fairly stable, quarter or yearly. So to your point there, Roger, we know what the company's trying to accomplish, and then we're going to create maybe some quarterly goals that help us get there along the way, some quarterly objectives. The one thing you'll note here, though, too, and Roger, I know you and I have had this conversation before. I'm a big fan of SMART goals. An objective is not a SMART goal. So for those SMART goal fanatics out there, they're looking at this and going, wait, where's all the details, the time bound, where's some of those details of SMART goals, measurable. And that's why we need key results. Key results help us make them become SMART goals.
Right. It's the combination of the two. That's right. Yep. Very good.
And then, so here's some examples from my career. I say they're good examples because they're from my career, so they must be good. These come from my background. I've worked in media, pharma, and nonprofit as well. So a news publication, their objective might say, hey, be the go-to destination for local political coverage. Right? And you can see that represents a new state as well. Like a new state is like, now we've reached a state of being the go-to destination.
Right.
And objectives work well with that. I don't have to read all of these. You can read them, but I do want to point out a couple of things, like with the pharma technology one, because I'm going to use that as an example throughout today. But in pharma technology, that's when we're helping pharmaceutical companies develop drugs and bring them to market. So technology that supports that. And so this one here, enable clients to find more qualified patients faster. That's something that I worked on a lot in my career. And so objective, though, you can see that that's inspiring. You can see it's ambitious. We're going to find more qualified patients faster. And then it's something that we can actually measure. We can't measure this, but we can create measurements for it.
Yeah.
For that.
Right. So this is the first part, right? Like you said, it needs to be, have a time bound and be inspiring. But then the second part of this is, how do you go about then being able to declare victory, right? And that's where then the key results come in, right? So we've got a question come in from Kevin. And Kevin, if I could invite you to unmute and share your question with us, we would love to answer it. Let's see whether I need to do something or whether you can just do it. Hold on a second. Here you are. Allow to talk. All right, Kevin, you should be able to unmute now.
All righty there. Hey guys, so as you're reading out these objectives, they sure look like what a company would define as a vision. How do objectives align to a vision? Do they complement? Are they the same thing? Do they replace? Help me understand the correlation there.
That's a great question. And, Kevin, a little bit later, I'll actually show you a slide on how this objective relates to the vision. And they should be closely tied, right? Because a great objective helps focus everyone on where we're heading and focus everyone on that vision. So they don't replace the vision. And oftentimes, I'm using really high level ones here because it's easier to understand. But Kevin, if you and I were working together and we were on a team at a company that was, as a whole, the company was trying to tackle this objective, we might create some more detailed objectives beneath that, right? So in this case, I can tell you that for the past company that created this pharma technology, this objective here is just one of many objectives of that company and the products that they have.
Yeah, as I was looking at this one, and it was your company, so I'll ask you to clarify, but it felt to me like this was more of a specific, like maybe a divisional objective, and the vision that we're talking about would have been even higher in terms of you're here, enable clients to find more qualified patients faster. Maybe it's for trials or maybe it was for sales. I'm not sure which, but the higher level vision for that pharma company is probably is something more even aspirational in terms of increase people's health, right? And if it was pharma that was in, say, the cancer division, increase quality of life, increased number of years of life, right? So those, I think, would be even higher level visions that then this objective would be feeding into, right? It's
Absolutely
to do, right?
And on that chain, I'll avoid getting really nerdy in the domain, but on that chain of things to reaching health, the health of the patient and improving health of the patient, there's things like bringing the product to market faster, right? And there's all these different elements. Bringing a study to faster, finding patients faster and better. I'm using faster a lot, but yes, there's lots of different parts of the chain to get to that overall vision.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. Hopefully, Kevin, that helped answer your question. We have another question. I understand that a key result, it's actually more of just a hope you talk about this thing. So I'll just cue it up because we're about to go into key results and then you'll be prepared. Vishal asks, I understand that a key result of someone's objective, usually at the higher ups, can become an objective for others on the team, right? So they daisy chain down, right? So if you agree, please elaborate a little bit on this. And I think when you talk about key results, we'll be able to.
We will. In fact, I have an example in just a couple minutes here that I think goes into that. That'll be great.
Perfect. Excellent. And then someone who is anonymous asked, who is setting objectives? And is the same person setting the key results?
That's a fantastic question as well. So the objectives, and we'll talk about this when we talk about right sizing for your team, but the objectives should be created by whatever the team leadership is, whatever that team is. And done well, like most product management activities, it should be a team sport in that you don't create an objective in a vacuum. You're working with your stakeholder. If it's an objective, an OKR for your product, you're working with your stakeholders, you're working with your development team. You all want to be on the same page, what you're trying to reach. And then in terms of defining the key results, this is a team activity as well, because the key result needs to be feasible for the entire team. So, you don't want to assign something to your team that's not going to work for them. So again, another team activity.
Yeah, you've got to get that buy-in, and to your earlier comment about SMART, this is where it does need to be achieved.
Yeah, and also it's a good segue here, right? Because you need to measure what matters.
Right.
And so key results here, this is thinking about measure what matters. Say here 2 to 3 per objective. You don't want to have 10 key results for one objective. You want to be the couple things that are like, we will know. So going, I'll give you an example in a minute. I'll show you some examples for key results. But think about this. These are not necessarily outputs and tasks. They can be, but they rarely are. They're usually measurements of progress. They tell you that it's a new milestone. So an example I like to give, I'm a big basketball nerd. I love playing basketball and reading and looking at stats. Let's say on an objective in my league, I guess now that'd be the over 40 league. Objective is to become a top 3-pointer in my basketball league. That's my objective. I want to be a top 3-point shooter in my basketball league. An example of a bad key result is shoot 50 3-pointers every day. And the reason that is like, that's not really result. It might help you become a good 3-point shooter, but what if you're shooting 50 3-pointers a day and you're missing all of them? It doesn't tell you that you're on your way. And so my good example is able to make 30% of 50 3-pointers or 30% of 100 3-pointers in practice, because that tells you I've up-leveled now. And once I achieve that, I can raise that number. Now I'm going to go for 35%.
Right, exactly. And it can even be percentage change, right? So if you're going from 30 to, you want to even get up to say 45, right? Then you would say, I want to increase my shooting percentage by 50%, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Those are things that also are measurable along the way. I like that. Excellent.
Absolutely. And I know we talked a lot about vanity metrics as well. I don't know if anyone's considering the vanity metrics out there, but there are vanity metrics is an example of something that doesn't measure what matters. A vanity metric, one of my favorite from my career was Facebook page likes. We have so many Facebook page likes that aren't turning into business. They're not turning into audience. So remember, try to avoid those things that just make you feel good and look good, but don't actually create any progress. So here's some examples. I'm using the enable our clients to find more qualified patients faster as the objective. And you can see some key results that I'm tracking here that should indicate that I'm on my way to doing that. Now, there's some terminology in here that's industry specific. Don't worry about it. The real point here is the key result is helping those coordinators review 1,000 records in an hour. And I'll tell you the one thing this implies that you know how fast coordinators can review a record and how many records they can review. And so creating good OKRs requires data. You got to have good data. And this, by the way, I use this one because this was the hardest one for me. As a product manager, I needed to find out how many records a study coordinator could review. And that was really hard to find.
I'll bet it was.
No excuse for it, right, Roger? Like no excuse. We gotta get the data. It doesn't matter if it's hard.
Yeah, and as a product manager, we're kind of diving a little bit deeper, but it's crucial that you're able to add to your requirements the ability to measure the indicators, what we like to call key performance indicators, or your data, so that you are gathering the right data in the first place. Because you may set these goals and go, oh, in order to do that, I'm actually going to have to rev my product, right? So then an even deeper sub goal of, okay, be able to measure how many records in an hour a CRC is able to review, right? So
early on, and you hit the nail on the head, early on in product development, I find that a lot of my OKRs are very simple because they're all about building that foundation. Right? I have to learn things, I have to gather data. This is a representative of maybe a little more mature. We're beyond that launch phase. We have some data.
Right. Well, we actually got a good question from Mark. He put it over in the chat box, but I happened to see it. So folks, just if I could ask, please put your questions in Q&A. Oh, and then he did. All right. So Mark, let me open this up. Why don't you ask your question, Mark?
Yeah, my question was, you have these goals. You said for those coordinators to do 1,000 records an hour, you had to have some sense as to what they actually can do. So what percentage is your, result based on what's actually achievable? How much of it is a stretch goal typically when you create your key measurements?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you brought up that point, because one of the things, so Google uses OKRs. They're avid users of OKRs. And one thing they say is that you should shoot for about 60 to 70%. You should be achieving about 60 to 70% of a goal. If you're always achieving 100% of it, that's a sign that you're not setting OKRs the right way, that you're setting things that are too easy to accomplish. So pretending that this was our reality and we've sat together and put this number in, we actually consider this something challenging to reach. We don't expect to reach 100%, but that we're putting that out there is something that stretches us and pulls us.
Yeah, that is a great point. Yeah, because I like that 100% example, right? And in our company, we set 80%. So maybe we're being even not aggressive enough, right? But that is what we do when we're trying to set our KRs is 80%. A quick question, what's the difference between a KR and a KPI?
I love that question. We're going to get to that in like 2 slides. Can we put a pin in that?
All right, I'll let you go on and then we'll tackle that one. Very good. I'm going to leave it here just to make sure we answer it, but I love this next
question. I do too. Roger and I are both big Star Wars fans, so hopefully we have some other ones that are out there. Yeah. This speaks back to that question too about, sometimes KRs can become objective. So looking here, this is all about right sizing your OKRs. You have to be realistic to what's within your sphere of influence. So Darth Vader, he leads the Empire. These are all the teams. This would be like our organization, right? Their objective is rule the galaxy. That is possibly within reach for them. So that's a stretch goal for them. That would be too much for one legion of stormtroopers. So theirs is crush rebel scum on Tatooine. Where you see that connection is look at KR3, right? KR3 on the Empire side, key result 3. Rebel incursion stamped out at least 90% of the time. Well, the stormtroopers could have looked at that and said, you know what? We're going to stamp out the rebel incursion on Tatooine, and we're going to take that key result. We're going to make that our objective. And so that's what they've done here. They've made that their objective. And for those Star Wars nerds like myself out there, KR2 is my favorite one on the 501st Legion side.
If only. And thankfully, they didn't achieve that goal.
Yeah, thankfully they didn't.
Things would not have gone so well for Luke if they had. That's right.
Yep.
All right. Well, it seems like it's time for another poll. Let's check in with our audience. And you say KPIs here. So maybe this is the time to explain that.
Yeah, we're going to be diving. So KPIs, key performance indicators. Roger explained what that was earlier. Really curious just about what you all are tracking right now, because we're going to talk about KPIs and how they relate to KRs, as well as objectives and key results, as well as key results specifically. That's a common question. It's a great question. So do you currently track any KPIs? If you do, are they sales and revenue related and user engagement? Is it one or the other? Maybe you're not tracking any, or maybe other. If you put other, I would love to hear in the chat what you are tracking.
Now, I don't see a single response yet. So folks, are you able to answer the poll? Because we're seeing the poll went away.
Poll closed.
Okay, let's see can we reopen that poll? Relaunch poll. Here we go.
I think we gave you guys 2 seconds. You got to be faster. I mean, plenty of time.
Here we go.
So yeah, you're focused. You have KPIs, key performance indicators that track both sales and revenue and user engagement. Are they mostly sales revenue related? And you can speak to this from a personal level as you managing your product, or you can think of it at a company level if you're thinking, well, my company seems to be highly focused on one.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Seems like we've gotten some good responses here. Let's end the poll and see the results. Excellent. So good. I like the mix. Sales revenue and user engagement got number 1. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. That's great news.
Definitely. Excellent. All right. So let's dive in to answer that earlier question. about OKRs versus KPIs.
The next two slides should tell that story. So, we talked about the difference between the two, OKRs and KPIs. I mentioned earlier about OKRs being that thing in the future you're trying to get to, right? It's leading you to here's where we want to be. So you think about this driving a car, you're looking at the point you're trying to reach, the destination you're headed, and you're tracking that. You're tracking that via GPS. It's showing you your route, showing you how you're getting there. That GPS might actually be a key result, one of those milestones on there, but it can also be a KPI that you're tracking that tells you that you're on your way, key performance indicator. But really where the difference is and where I think it becomes distinct and important is when you think about elements that are not within the objective and key result. So examples of this, KPIs tend to be standalone numbers. So things like attendance, revenue, donations, user satisfaction, right? They're not about purpose. They're not about your path to where you're headed all the time. So if you think about this in driving, if I'm just looking at my GPS and I'm just thinking about my destination, that doesn't mean for certain I'm going to reach my destination, because I could run out of fuel, and I have. Life will tell you that I have. If I'm not watching my gas gauge, it can go to empty and I can run out of fuel. So it's similar with KPIs. You need to track things that even not necessarily always relevant to your OKR. So for example, going back to that story about finding patients faster, I'm still going to track things like my acquisition. I'm going to track my user satisfaction, because we could be finding patients faster, but for some reason we're not getting new users on our platform, or we're finding patients faster, but our users are reporting that they hate our platform. They hate the UI in our platform. So we got to be able to track both those things.
Right. So you need KPIs in order to be able to track progress on your OKRs, but not every KPI necessarily is going to lead to an OKR, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, right. So yeah, they're in terms of like Venn diagrams, the KRs are, the KPIs are bigger and the KRs are a subset of those KPIs, right? And those KPIs are only there if you've done the right code work or process work to be able to track that data in the first place, right?
You went to the same place I did, Roger. I'm like, man, I need to make a slide now with a Venn diagram.
There you go. Excellent. Well, but you've got more here. Oops.
I got one other here just to show you how a KPI might relate to a specific KR that you are tracking. So you're tracking revenue, that's part of your OKRs. Then a KPI would look like this, right? And you have this data where over time, you can see it's a leading indicator that you're on track to reaching that OKR. So I know some people visually, it helps to see a graph. So I thought this would help.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that's a good visual. Hopefully that makes things clear for folks. All right.
So let's talk about North Stars, true north and a roadmap. This is something that comes up for me a lot, where I feel like our roadmap can become disconnected from these objectives and key results. And so I wanted to highlight how we connect these dots so that it's meaningful. It's meaningful to us, and our roadmap becomes more meaningful. So let's say we had a true north of the fastest resource for finding qualified patients. That's what we want to create. That's our end result. And so we create an objective for that. We're going to enable clients to find more qualified patients faster. And I will point out, looking at this again, I'm like, technically, we can make two objectives out of this. I could make an objective, find more patients faster. I could make another objective, find more qualified patients. They really could be two objectives if I wanted to.
It's a really good point. Yeah.
And then key results, we talked about those earlier. So now how does this connect to the roadmap? Well, now I'm going to look at one of these key results and think about what can enable us to accomplish this. And again, this is a team activity. I'm doing this with our team. I'm looking at our data. I'm talking to our engineers, and they're saying, actually, if our goal is to review 1,000 records in an hour, we should auto ingest the trial criteria. Those are all nerdy terms from the pharma industry, but we should be able to auto ingest, just bring in all the criteria that we need. That should be automatic, and that will help us move faster. Okay, great. And then what if we had searchable filters? We had lots of searchable filters that help these coordinators find what they're looking for. Great ideas. I want to speak to one thing though. In doing this, I'll tell you how I write it. You don't have to write it the Todd way, but this is how I write it. I get nervous when my roadmap just says features. I really want my roadmap to speak to outcomes.
Right.
So when I actually write this, I say something like, if we create searchable filters, then our persona will be able to use filters to narrow the patient set faster. And we'll know this is true when, and then I bring in my KPI that I have, right? I bring in that KPI, and then I say, and so then now I'm talking about a specific outcome, and I'm talking about how I'm measuring it all within my roadmap, which I connects now to that true north.
Right. No, I like the way you're talking about doing that, because you want to connect both the feature and the benefit that feature is going to deliver, right? That's great. Excellent. So I hope this I think is one of the money slides of this presentation, right? Of it answers several of the questions that we heard earlier, and it shows how you get from true north to what should go on your roadmap. So very powerful.
And I'll mention one more thing there too, Roger. The other side benefit of this that I think is so important is it connects your dev team with business objectives.
Right. That's a
like
really
when we talk about like charging up the hill, like I'll charge up the hill if you can give me a good hill to charge up.
Right.
This to me lets them see like, oh yeah, that's why we're building the filters. And that's this story I have in the sprint this week is going to help us achieve that end. So
yes, exactly. So user stories connecting to features, connecting to epics that are on this roadmap, right? Yeah, very powerful. Love it. Uh-oh.
Sometimes we go the wrong way. I mean, I've never been wrong in my career, but I know some people have been.
Okay, I for one will admit I've been wrong many a time.
I'm wrong every day. You have to be wrong. Oh, and you have to be comfortable being wrong, right? No, it's okay. We have to be comfortable being wrong. And so I thought maybe we could ping pong on this, Roger. Some of the anti-patterns to avoid.
Okay.
One of my what do you call it? Hot buttons issues. One of my things that bother me is when OKRs are used as employee evaluation metrics. So for leaders that are out there right now, I know it's tempting to do that because you feel like, well, then I'm connecting outcomes with performance, right? And that makes sense. It does, but it doesn't. And let me just share why. We are all good as humans at finding the shortest path to success. So if you tell me, hey, Todd, your bonus is based on your OKR, I'm going to set that bar somewhere like right down here. I'm going to make it so easy to accomplish. I want my bonus. And so I always say, like, don't do that. We want OKRs to be stretching us, right? We want them to pull us and to be audacious. So don't use them as evaluation metrics. Can you think of anti-patterns for you, Roger?
Yeah, it's, you don't want OKRs that are a little too low on the horizon, right? Let's just keep continuing to do this, right? So that continuing to do things should not be an OKR. It should be a part of doing your daily job, right? So it's unfortunate, but it's true that, look, our expectations will continue to rise. So once you accomplish an OKR, what's next, right? It's time to go like, okay, this is awesome. And you should celebrate that moment. But then what's the next thing that we can now accomplish? We've got here, this is our new baseline. Where are we going to go next to get even better, right?
Yeah, and if you look at market leaders, look at someone like Coke. I promise you, Coke is not saying, let's just stay and maintain. They're constantly looking at ways to capture even more market share. It's never good enough. Right. The other one I have too that I think is important, we kind of touched on this earlier, but don't let OKRs overwhelm your roadmap. They should guide your roadmap, but not overwhelm it. I've seen funky things where people try to finagle their tech debt into their OKR. That makes no sense. But it's something we have to do. It's something we have to do. And sometimes there's items on a roadmap. Hey, we have to do a data model refactor. We just have to. And we know we're going to spend the next release doing that. Well, that's not really going to help you achieve your objective. It does, but it doesn't. That's just something we have to take on. So just be realistic that, the roadmap is not just for OKRs.
Right. It is about our, like you said, the roadmap's more expansive, right? It's about these objectives, but it's also about running your business, right? And being effective in other areas like customer service, for example, right?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Now grading.
Now we got to grade them. At the end of each period, we should know how we did. This is one thing, and we've heard all sorts of quotes on that, like you do what you measure and things like that, right? I think it's funny is I've made this error before of setting a goal and never actually looking back to see if I achieved that goal. So
Right.
we don't want to make that mistake. There's
Mhm.
two ways of scoring that you could try. One is just a yes, no method. Look at each key result. Do we get 1,000 records in an hour? Yes or no? You can go binary. The other one is a little more sophisticated, and that's scoring per each OKR. This is what Google does this. And this is where they're looking for that ideal score between 60 and 70%, because 100% would indicate you're too easy. So I think if you click, I think the next thing up is a scale, and you'll see this scale that goes between 0 and 1.
Mhm.
0 and 1. And what we do is we look at each key result. So the first one, we could review 1,000 records in an hour. Maybe I do a review and I say, you know what, we reached 900 records in an hour. So we didn't quite reach 1,000.
Right.
Well, that's some easy math. I could fill up that bar now up to 0.9.
Mhm.
So if you see the next animation, you'll see it goes up to 0.9.
There you go.
And then I do the same thing for the next one.
Mhm.
And that's, we decreased 13 hours, not all the way. We got close. We go to the next one. We actually didn't do very good on qualification rate. We got 20%, which is better, but just didn't reach our goal. And then now we can look at these things as a whole. We can look at our objective bar, and we can see that fills up. If we add, we just do the easy math here. We add up, 0.5, 0.7, 0.9, divide by 3. And you'll see there, we're at 0.7. So that
Mhm.
tells us that for our objective, we reached 0.7 of our goal. So that delivered. We should be happy about that. But this is one way we can score and help us see where we can continue to progress. And maybe this inspires new key results, or maybe even new objectives.
Right. So to your point earlier, in the Google system, this 70% is like a celebration, right? We
Yes,
got
absolutely.
to that moment, and we want to celebrate that. So I think the other key thing is, oftentimes people go, well, 70% is a C. And it's like, well, okay, no, we're not using grade school grades on your report card. We're using a standard that, a major industry player like Google says is the great thing to compare yourself against. So use benchmarks that are appropriate for your industry in order to be able to measure your progress and see how well you're doing. And I like the other thing that you talked about here with that key result 3 is like, okay, on that one, all right, we got to 20%. And maybe 40% was a little bit too ambitious. So maybe we set to 30% next quarter, right? But
Absolutely.
the other thing I want to say, when you're doing these things, don't ever set a goal like these key results without knowing what you're going to do differently to get there, right? So you can't just say, shoot, we only got to 20%, we wanted 40%. Well, let's say 30%. Well, all right, what are you going to do differently in this coming quarter to get to that 30% above the 20% you've already achieved? Because if you're not going to do anything different, there's no reason to believe, getting back to SMART, right? There's no reason to believe you can get there, right? So this
It relates back perfectly to that chart we did with the true north, right? Because in the end, we had the 2 roadmap items. Without those items, we're not doing anything. I love that point. The other point I'll mention again, I'll go back. I know I've said it before, but the 100% thing. If you're getting 100% every time, and to me as a consultant, this is also often indicative to me of a bad company culture. And I've seen this as a new product leader starting at new companies, or as a consultant when I talk about goals. When the response is we always reach 100%. Every presentation is we did it again 100%. That's indicative of we have a culture problem.
Right. There's both this too low ambitions, but also there might even be a fear of failure going on there, right? And you've got to flip that culture to fail fast and be excited about incremental progress, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got a question from Suzanne, and I think I'll just read this one. Any reason we use decimals instead of percentages? I don't mean this as a silly question, but I'm just curious, is there a scale used? Is there some psychology behind doing it this way versus, say, using 100 or using percentages?
Yeah, it's a great question. From what I understand of this was developed, the scale developed again by Google, was that it's supposed to be binary. So 1 and 0s, yes and no.
Okay.
And so they used the yes and no, 1 and 0 scale, and then divided that by 10. I don't know if any deeper psychology to it, that it does something different than a greater scale like 100.
Right.
Good question.
Yeah, and I don't, given that make the scale work for you and your company's culture. But that's great to know
Absolutely.
that it came from Google. That's for sure.
So John Doerr, I thought that he should be someone to help us with our final word, since he was one of the creators and founders of OKRs. He actually brought it from Intel. Andy Grove, at Intel really started OKRs, and then taught John Doerr, who ultimately brought it to Google, and that's why they're avid users of it. But he had this quote here. I'll read it. The crucial quality of a healthy OKR culture are ruthless intellectual honesty, a disregard for self-interest, and a deep allegiance to the team. I thought maybe, Roger, you and I could just talk about our favorite elements of this.
Yeah, that intellectual, the ruthless part, right? The ruthless intellectual honesty is connects a little bit to what I was saying a moment ago in terms of like, I want to set goals, but I want to know how I'm going to get there. And I have to be honest about what's achievable. And I will fess up, as a leader over the years, and even just like last year, I set goals for my team one quarter that were probably just too ambitious. And in doing so, I demotivated the team a little bit. And that was a mistake, right? So that intellectual honesty has to also reflect on how are we going to get there, and how can we set a goal that is a stretch goal, but like to your point about Google, if we can get 70% of the way there, that will be an awesome moment that we should celebrate.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that too, about that demotivation, because I was thinking about this morning and preparing for this webinar, how we have to be comfortable with failing as product managers. I was teasing before, I haven't failed. I failed all the time. We have to be comfortable with failure as long as we're learning from it. We have to be comfortable with being wrong, again, as long as we're learning from it. We know why we were wrong. And I think this is an example. OKRs are the same. When you go to first make your OKRs, because I've done this and I've made the mistake of doing what you did, Roger, setting too aggressive OKRs that demotivated. I've made the mistake of setting OKRs that are too simple, and I realized it didn't really stretch us. I've made the mistake of trying to make people happy. I like the second one, disregard for self-interest. I made the mistake of trying to make other people happy too, though, and not really thinking about the team. And so we just have to be comfortable with that. And so my recommendation for anyone who's doing this new, taking this on anew, just like anything in product management, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? Sit down, make an OKR, and see how it works. And a quarter later, 3 months later, you might say, "Ooh, I didn't really write that right. That was too aggressive," and then learn from it. Don't be afraid to mess up.
Absolutely. One more comment I want to make on this one is this deep allegiance to the team part. And you touched on this earlier, so I just want to emphasize it again. As you're setting the objectives are going to connect it to, say, a corporate objective or a divisional business objective. So there may be less opportunity for the team to input on that. But for the KR, that has to be something where the whole team buys into it. So as a leader, don't avoid the temptation of like, oh, it's going to be 78, right? And I just pick that number, okay? Instead, you've got to get the team rallied around, well, what do we think we can achieve? And how do we think we're going to make changes to get to that goal? And then what's the right number, right? And there will be some interplay, right? Well, sometimes maybe the team is being a little less ambitious than they should be. Sometimes teams can be a little over ambitious. There have been times, I had this happen last year, actually, with one of our new initiatives, where one of my team members was like, "I'm going to get to 400." I'm like, okay, let's do a little crawling and walking before we run. And I was the one who scaled back that goal to be more like 250, right? So those conversations need to happen, and that will show the allegiance, so that at the end of the day, as the leader, I'm not going to say this always has to be something that everybody agrees, right? But as a leader, you want the team to have had input and be able to point at the KRs and say, yeah, I was heard, and we set this objective accordingly, right? Set the KR accordingly.
I actually do that with my kids, by the way. We set OKRs, and I've done the same with them. Guys,
Excellent.
too aggressive.
Wow. All right, so we've had a couple more questions come in. I want to get to those in just a moment, so hang on the questions. I do want to talk a little bit about some opportunities for our audience. We just launched a new blended learning offering called Insights to Digital Product Success. And what this does is it allows you to be able to do an assessment, so you actually can measure how strong are you in your digital product management skills, then take our self-study course And using the assessment results, you kind of know where do I need to focus in that self-study to improve my skills in the areas where I was probably weakest. And then take a live online workshop, data-informed decisions workshop, that then takes what you learned in the digital management, product management self-study course and builds on top of it. This workshop's awesome because it's a 3-hour workshop that allows you to just do nothing but exercises for 3 hours under the guidance of an expert, leveraging what you learned from the course itself. So this is the one that would really help you dive deeper on how am I going to go get the data I need to be successful, to establish my KPIs that then would allow me to build my OKRs. So check out that suite. I think we just go to 280group.com if we don't have a link for it handy, because we just changed our e-commerce platform literally last night. So go to 280 Group and check out our digital product management course suite and set, and you'll find insights to digital product success there. And then we've got, oh, we did get the link. Excellent. And then if you just need something more generic or you like a live online studying approach, take the digital product management course, right? That's a more comprehensive live online approach. If you like self-study, then you could go for the suite. If you like live online, where you're being guided through this with a live instructor, then check this out. Check out digital product management. All right, so let me put our poll up, or I'll get the poll launched, and then we can start answering some more questions. Okay, so we got a question from, so let's get that poll launched, and then got a question from an anonymous person, so I can't ask them to speak, but for teams who have never set OKRs, where do you start? It seems like starting with set an objective can invite chaos. Is there a way to organize your thoughts?
Yeah, I love this. So the first thing that helps me in doing this, so I've done the same. I've been in a position where I'm creating my first objectives and key results in an organization that doesn't have objectives and key results. Oh. And I'll tell you, it's not easy, but it's going to be a great opportunity for you to become a product leader. So what I do is, what I start with is I try to simplify. I love simplifying things down to the heart of the vision of the product. Mm-hmm. That's where I start. What is the heart of this? What's the simplest thing we're trying to do? Once I get that I usually use something similar to be my first objective. And the reason I said this will help you become a product leader is because to be able to create that objective now, you're gonna have to go talk to your stakeholders and validate that you have actually found the heart of the product. Mm-hmm. And so it leads to conversations with leadership and stakeholders within your company that maybe they really haven't had, because we often talk a lot about our features and what our product is doing, and not enough about why our product exists. Yes. And so that's why I would recommend start with, why does this exist? What is the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here? Make that your first objective, and then shop it around with your stakeholders to, I believe this is our key goal that we're trying to do. And that will help you. Roger, you probably have other tips as well.
Yeah, so at a company where OKRs weren't prevalent as well, what I did in one company was I listened to what the CEO was talking about at our town hall meeting, right? So, and there's just a subtlety here, right? It's easier when the CEO says, okay, this coming year or this coming quarter, we really need to achieve this, right? And then you got to turn to your product team and say, all right, here's the North Star that our CEO has said. What's my product objective that would help the company move forward to that North Star? Okay, so that's easier when the CEO says something like, okay, this is where we want to go. Suppose the CEO doesn't say that. The other thing that I've done in the past is look at what is important at a town hall. What does the VP of marketing or the VP of finance or the CEO say? What data do they share? What information do they share? What competitive threats do they talk about? Listen to those things. So even if they're not stated as goals, you learn a lot by just listening to the kinds of information that are clearly the important things, right? So if the executive team or the CEO is sharing, here are these important things, those are also a very strong clue of, here's something that my product, and you have to align it with the value your product delivers, of course, right? But based on the value your product delivers and what those things you heard were at that last executive team, all hands or whatever it might be, that's another place to get started. But I definitely would agree, and I think you said the same thing, start at the center of value, or start with something that's a true north, and then be able to connect that to your product objective. I think that's a really great way to start.
Can I add to that too? Because I love that, Roger. I was going to say the other great thing that does is it creates opportunities to have conversations now with your leadership when you're doing what you said, parroting back to them what you heard. to have these conversations that are much more important than about them wanting the button to be blue. Now you're having these conversations about, I heard that you're trying to reduce churn by 5%. And because you mentioned that, I actually think we could do this in our product. And now you're talking on a level that is, it's much more impactful for you as a product manager, and it's better for you in your career too. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and you're right. I like the idea of a conversation, right? Don't just make an assumption. It's probably a good idea that once you've set this up, talk to your manager or your division leader and make sure before you get going that this is something that is going to be valuable to the company, because maybe you've misunderstood something. It's important to do that before you get going, for sure. Okay, another question. Hey, Mark, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
So yeah, mine was more of a question around just kind of cadence. If you're kind of setting quarterly OKRs, like how far in advance of the fourth quarter should you establish your fourth quarter OKRs, and so that the teams can kind of rally around them, product can kind of adjust the roadmap, all of those things? What is your recommendation?
That's a great question, and that's something that we've actually been fiddling with to a degree. And so what we've come to the conclusion, and we're testing this now, is we want to try to set those new goals. We have a leadership team meeting at the beginning of the third month of the current quarter, and set sort of company objectives that then help us at the team level drive, so that we then have the next week or two to work on at the product team level or the department level, what should our OKRs be for this coming quarter, so that we really do have them. And then there's a feedback loop, right? Go back to leadership team and make sure this makes sense, so that we really do have them locked down before the beginning of the next quarter. And this has taken us some time to get into that rhythm and get going on it. What it does mean, though, is that we set these goals in such a way that we can measure the effectiveness of how close do we get at the beginning of that third month of the coming quarter. So suppose, like in your example, you're setting this in the fourth quarter. You should be able to check in the first or second week of that third month of the quarter and say, am I within 75, 80% of that goal? Am I going to get there or not? So that you then can do this check-in and be able to properly set goals for the next quarter. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. So what I'm hearing you say is that you measure the third quarter goals, where you're basically 2/3 of the way through the third quarter, right, to see how you're doing against them. And then you establish the fourth quarter goals, assuming that, that's a good indication of where you ended up in the third quarter, and then establish the fourth quarter goals in advance, that month in advance or a couple of weeks in advance of the fourth quarter.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
The risk is,
for example,
go ahead, Roger.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, the risk is, you've probably seen this in your career, Mark, right? The risk when you're setting that OKRs for Q4 in January and too far ahead, it's so loose, and you become so far off as you get near there. And you might learn that directionally your company wants to go a different way, or your division or your product wants to go a different direction. You might learn that you were doing better than you thought you were, or worse than you thought you were. So I just the rule of thumb there, like what Roger was saying, it sounds like, 90%, depending on what the period is, right? Because if you're a C-level executive, your probably OKRs are more like a year out or more. And so, but you want to be somewhere 90% to that before you start deciding what your next OKRs are going to be.
Yeah, that's, I guess, more vision and North Star that has that kind of long range view versus, operational.
Yeah, it's very true. And normally about that first or second week of the third month of the quarter, like we just did this actually a week and a half ago. And when we did it, we were like, oh, well, look, so I had 4 of these OKRs, and 2 of them are done. And one of them was a clear miss, and there's no way I'm going to get to it by the end of this quarter, right? And then the other one, yeah, I think we're going to make it, right? So then that allows you to quickly calibrate, okay, what are we going to do next quarter? What can I build on top of those successful ones? What do I got to do for the one that I just missed completely, right? And that you normally have enough insight at that point to be able to make good decisions about the next quarter that way. That's what we're learning anyway. That's what we've been doing. Great, thanks, Mark. Okay, an anonymous person asked another question. My company seems to suffer from too many number one priorities. How many OKRs should a team really have?
That's a great question. I've worked at that company too. So,
yeah, so have I.
Lots of number one priorities. Yeah. We're going to do all 80 things. No, I do think for your right sizing for your team, you're back in the same range of about 2 to 3. There are others that say 3 to 5. I have found that I can, and as a leader of a team, keep my team focused on about 3 or less. That seems right. That when I get more than 3, I tend to lose focus. And so I've learned that ideal 2 to 3 is ideal.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb. I would agree with you. I think 3 is a good sweet spot. We say 3 to 4. So yeah, it's all in that right range. I do like that focus aspect. And then remember, these are OKRs. There are just running the business KPIs that you are expected to continue to do. So when you get like 8 OKRs, it's like, wait, is that really reflecting the fact that I also have to continue to run my business? No. And I've made that mistake before, right? Where I get too ambitious with all these other things, ignoring the fact that, as the head of product, I still have to help with the escalations for customer support. We have got to make sure that we're continuing to iterate on incremental improvements on our existing products, right? All of that stuff still has to get done, right? So I agree with you. 3 feels like a good number for that. And then the last question, I think we have time for one more. What should we do if we don't have the data to track the OKR?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, we've talked about this implying that the data is there. And I think I mentioned this earlier about there not being an excuse to not have the data. So toughest challenge I had in my career was finding out how quickly a study coordinator could find a patient. And that was a number that we needed to track.
Right.
So ultimately, the answer to that question is, first off, you can't ignore it. I'll be honest, I ignored it for about a month. You can't ignore it. It is, if it's the data that you need. And it comes back to product instrumentation. Oftentimes you're going to say, okay, this is a question we need to answer. And therefore I need to either, one, instrument the product with the right data. So work to find out what that is and then instrument your product. The other is to set up your tiny acts of discovery, your experiments. That might mean that you need to have some research process for getting that. That could be surveying your users. That could be visiting them. And with our study coordinators, that's what we had to do. We had to actually have lots of different interviews and observations to be able to suss out what a baseline speed for finding patients look like. And so you're usually going to have to do one of those 2 things. But I think most importantly is just because it's hard doesn't mean you can stop. You're just going to have to find a way to get it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I want to reemphasize the point you made about observation, because on this one in particular, right, the CRCs may inflate. If you just surveyed them, they may well inflate what their ability is, right? Whereas observation more objectively allows you to measure, where are they at? And that observation is also going to probably have the fringe benefit of showing you where are some inefficiencies in what they're doing. And how can I better enable them with a more powerful product to overcome those, right? So observation is a very powerful technique. If you haven't tried that, whole other webinar on that topic, but great point, definitely. So yeah, I like also that phrase, tiny acts of discovery. So cut these down into small bites and see what you can do to learn more. I think that's very powerful. Okay. Well, Todd, thank you so much for a great conversation about OKRs and how to set them. I'm hoping that we gave people a lot of good tips and they know now where to start to get going on this. If you need help transforming your team with some private custom training or optimizations and assessments or our strategic advisor services, please check us out, 280group.com. And then you'll be able to use our contact us link there, and we can then lean in and help you improve the product management discipline at your company. Thanks again, Todd. Have a great day. Thanks all of you for your time and attendance. I hope you find the recording helpful, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.